So the topic for quarterfinal 3 is a very interesting topic. It's a topic that worries me a little bit. And the topic is this. Children's fiction, example, fairy tales, cartoons, etc., should not portray characters as purely good or purely evil, and rather portray them as morally ambiguous. You can take 2 minutes to laugh. I mean, it's all right, because everything in our world is getting politically correct. I mean, this whole thing about everything being politically correct is a bit too much today. Don't you think Enid Blyton is not good? She's racist. Maybe she is. I don't want to argue about that. But to what level are we going to take this argument? I mean, you can't call fat people fat. In fact, somebody told me that you can't call a cafeteria cafeteria. It is called a dining facility. You see? You can't say exercise. You call it body enhancement through exertion. And you can't call a car. You have to call it earth unfriendly, vertically challenged mode of transport. Think about it. Okay, so we've got 2 wonderful contestants for and against. There's 4, Kanishka Chawala, who's the winner, North Zone, RIMS International School and Junior College, and fighting against the motion from the same school, which is RIMS International School and Junior College, is Leisha Dogra.
Bells, whistles and cheers. All things glamorized about fairy tales. They also have the reputation of the classic good and evil plot. It teaches children about the good and bad of the world. Or does it? Not entirely. It also polarizes their interpretations of good and evil, determining certain characteristics for good and fixed for evil. Fairy tale characters, being morally ambiguous rather than good or evil, will help children comprehend people around them better and prepare them for the real, un-fairy tale-like world. In this speech, I'm going to be focus on the impact casted on the children, following them through their adult years, and hindrances with approachability and social acceptability. When children are taught matters in pure sense, purely good and purely evil, it makes them one-sided. Evil will only be interpreted as bad, with them being unwilling to understand the circumstances or the backstory of the person concerned. The conclusion of evil defines the whole person by just one act. This is basically judging a book by its cover. In the real world as well, when someone seems bad, people tend to stay away from them as their subconscious interface starts ringing the alarm bells. Similarly with good, it embodies that there is a clear distinction between good and bad, and only certain predetermined characteristics are required to be purely good, mentally lowering the bar, exposing them to toxic relationships, manipulation, and more, due to fixation on qualities deemed as good or deemed as acceptable. With morally ambiguous characters who are open to varied possibilities, children would learn to put themselves in others' shoes, being more empathetic and considerate towards others' actions and behaviors. We live in a fast-paced changing world, with individuals with diversified opinions. These opinions are influenced by different cultures, backgrounds, and research. When fairy tales communicate messages of good and evil, it blurs the lines separating fantasy and actuality. Kids and young adults tend to fractionate the masses and not budge from their own understandings. They become more headstrong and they're unable to realize others' point of view. They're quick to judge others according to the standardized signs of good and evil. They become less open to possibilities and have a tunnel vision of purely good and purely evil, black or white, overlooking the middle gray ground. Making characters in fairy tales and cartoons morally ambiguous will encourage people from a young age itself to see the 2 sides to a coin. It will stimulate their thought process, encouraging them to widen the horizon of their understanding early on. In the real world, there is good in every evil and evil in every good. The subliminal messages communicated through this affects the portrayal of people, placing certain people on a pedestal while downtrodden on the others, disuniting the masses even more. Thank you.
As a child, my favorite part of the day was traveling to different worlds and meeting my favorite characters from the tiny corner of my bedroom. My travel transportation could be a book, a show, or a movie. It didn't really matter because all of them were equally convenient. Growing up are some of the most memorable years of a child. Growing up is also the years where the imagination can run free with no leash to hold them on to. In those years, they can be children without any judgment. And I'm sure that most scriptwriters and authors would agree with me. Only when writing for children can you give full rein to pure, unadulterated wickedness or greatness. Before I get to the pointers of my argument, I would like to rebuttal some of the proposition's pointers. The proposition mentioned about how we don't look at the backstory, how we start to understand the backstory of a villain. However, as we grow, from a young age, we started with Cinderella and all these other fairy tales. And just to mention, fairy tales is not the only child fiction that there is. There are various other genres. But as we grow, our tastes evolve as well. From Cinderella, we go to Batman. Now, Batman, we know that Joker has a backstory, and we understand that because as we grow, like I said, sorry to keep repeating my point, but emphasis on the fact that our tastes evolve, so we don't always focus on the good and it's only evil. Children's fiction is supposed to be for purely entertainment purposes. The reasons show like Chhota Bheem and authors like Roald Dahl are so popular with children is because of how exaggerated the characters and the plot lines are. It's entertaining. These stories rely on visual hyperbole to communicate and engage with their young audiences. And it is a proven fact that most of these shows bank on the heroic stance of their protagonist and the manipulative wickedness of the antagonist to captivate their viewers or their readers. The storyline of good versus evil has been in power throughout history. But why is that? That is because simply of how much children love it, the satisfaction we get, because of how memorable it is, and because of how we keep coming back for more. There's a reason it's called children fiction, because this sort of line of thinking would not last in YA or adult fiction. And as children grow, like I said, their preference in books changes. I started with Cinderella, I started with Sleeping Beauty, these fairy tales of good and evil, and I have come to understand how the world works, because this sort of mindset will not stick to you. We don't want the so-called realistic view of the world. We don't want to show the so-called realistic view of the children. We want them to laugh and enjoy, because soon enough they would be exposed to the realities in front of them. And in those times, we want to remember that no matter how evil a person is or how manipulative they are, good always wins in the end. Because as I saw Sleeping Beauty and I saw Chhota Bheem, I wanted to be a hero in my own life, and I wanted to be the good guy in my own life. And that is what kept me going, and that is what will keep them going. Thank you.
Hi, both of you spoke extremely well. However, my question for you, Kanishka, is that I have an almost 9-year-old now, and I worry about her when she reads certain stuff. And a lot of the literature now is actually, I wouldn't say morally ambiguous exactly, but the characters tend to be a little less goody two-shoes. There's Dory Phantasmagory, there's Tom Gates, and there's all of that, which is characters are sort of quite bratish and quite interestingly nuanced. My question for you is that, isn't it good to know good and to know evil well and straight and have a clear line of that in your head, rather than be diluted with having a large grey expanse to traverse as a young child? Because you might not be able to comprehend that. And your moral compass, which is formed pretty early, like a child knows when they're lying and they know that this is not good, this is bad. So they understand, and the rewards of good actions and bad actions become clearer to them at a very young age. So Your thoughts?
So, fairy tales usually have, like you said, clear distinctions of good and evil. Well, that doesn't really exist in the real world. We live in a gray world, and the spectrum is wide. And as children, when parents read stories to their kids, they read it with the intentions of teaching them morals, which would help them further in life. So, if we teach children that this is good and this is bad, they become more vulnerable to manipulation because they're unable to see the two sides of the story. And it's good to know good, obviously, but it's also good to know that good is not always good, and there is a backstory to the good, and evil is not always bad, and there's a backstory to the evil as well.
Leisha, a question for you is, unfortunately, when you write children's fiction, the biases that you have in that time in society don't go away. So often, if you notice fairy tales, inherently evil also coincides pretty closely with characters that are dark-skinned, like Ursula in The Little Mermaid. And that's actually very, very common, because the moment you superimpose your conception of what is good and what is bad with all the biases you already have, you are then creating a picture for young children to inherit those biases as well. Wouldn't we just be in a better world if all characters had a little bit of good and a little bit of bad in them, so that you don't attach goodness to a particular type of person?
Yes, typically we do. There are certain attributes, but actually, The Little Mermaid was not dark skinned. She was actually, if you see in the television shows, which is a more common that's the more common source of entertainment for most kids rather than books, she's actually darkish purple in color to show that, you know, she's a creature but not a actual human. The entire base of the story was that she wanted to become human and have her pretty voice. So no, I don't think, because even in the end, I was obsessed with Little Mermaid, and I can personally relate with my obsession with not only fairy tales but just fiction in general. I'm a great avid reader, and my choices have evolved, and so has my thought process. So I feel, as you know, it's even their parents' duty to start to teach kids from a young age about, you know, how certain features do not attribute to a person's character, rather you judge the character. And I feel manipulation and, you know, lies is one of the main premises of these books, of what makes a villain, and which is why so that's like, the moment you see someone lying, you'll be like, oh, that's a person I do not want to relate myself to from a very young age. And that's good, because peer pressure is a thing. You start hanging out with people who lie, you will get, you know, compelled or peer pressured into also lying to your parents. Thank you.
Yes, I think we have the results of the third quarterfinal, and the girls are both with bated breath waiting to find out who has won, for or against. Dhruva.
Thank you both for that debate, and I think it was a pretty morally ambiguous debate. There wasn't a lot of black and white here, which is why it took us a bit of time to come to our decision. But we have come to a decision, and is the speaker against the motion, Leisha. Congratulations and commiserations, Kanishka.
Lovely, lovely, lovely. That was a really good third quarterfinal. And now we are heading to one of our final quarterfinals, which is our fourth and last quarterfinal.